Hello, everybody, and welcome to Full Throttle for the month of June. Before we go ahead and dive in, go ahead and drop in the comments in the chat box if you're on Crowdcast, whether you're on YouTube, LinkedIn, comment and let us know where you are watching from. We definitely have a global stage today. We have our speakers from around the world, and I'm sure we have a lot of listeners from around the world as well. So let us know where you're calling in from. I'm Parisa Noble. I'm going to be your host for today as we walk through this workshop. And many of you who are watching have probably tuned into a Full Throttle workshop up to this point. But if you haven't, the backstory behind what we're doing here today is this is a monthly workshop. Full Throttle happens every month, and each month is focused on a different topic as it pertains to digital transformation. So last month we did a full session on organizational change management. This month we're talking about technology strategy and optimization. And every month we're bringing in experts from the field who are very experienced in what they're doing. They've been doing this for years, and they're sharing their insights, their best practices with you so that you can walk away with some new strategies in your back pocket to implement for your company. Now, really today we're talking about what keeps IT business leaders, CIOs up at night. What are you guys thinking about? What is stressing you out so much? And you're kind of just looking for the answers. And that's kind of what helped us design today's workshop, asking those questions like, are our company systems efficient and effective? Are we optimizing our IT strategy? How does our system architecture look? And how is it, is it going to be able to handle our growth trajectories? What does our data look like? Are we safe from all these crazy cyber threats that seem to be taking wind now? It's really interesting to see how today's digital landscape is evolving, and I'm sure it's causing a lot of stress for those who are running the IT side of the businesses that we're talking to today. So with that said, we have the experts here today to walk us through how to handle all these changes. Now, I want to invite you guys throughout this whole session, ask questions, get involved. You have a panel of experts, consultants who are here to take your questions. And, we really want to make sure that you get your value from this session. So if you have a specific, unique scenario that you want advice on, this is the platform to do it. That's the whole point of our workshop. So don't hesitate. Add your questions, add your comments, add your own perspective as well. I mean, we learn from you guys. It's that collaborative approach. So dive in. Now, I want to introduce our global third stage team that's going to be walking us through 3 different sessions today. We have Stuart Robb, who's the VP of Third Stage Consulting Group in Europe, and he's going to be talking about the overview of technology strategies and best practices. So really, what does your digital strategy look like? We also have Wayne Holtham, who is our VP of Third Stage Consulting in Asia Pacific, and he's talking more so about system architecture and business architecture. And we're going to wrap it up with Daryl Crockett, who is our VP of Data at Third Stage, and she's going to be talking about data and cybersecurity. So just high level, how this is going to work. We have 3 50-minute sessions roughly, and at the end of each session, we'll take a 5 to 10-minute break and then jump into the next session. Again, throw your questions, comments in the chat box, throw it in the comments, depending on where you're watching, and we'll go ahead and kick it off. So I want to bring Stuart Robb to the stage, our VP of Third Stage Europe. It's funny because every time I want to get ready for an event like this, I ask questions of our speakers just so I can get to know them a little bit. And Stuart's question, or his answers, I should say, were hilarious. And I'm going to run through them, and you might get a kick out of this too. So I asked him, where are you from? And he said, from his mother's tummy. And I got to say, that makes you really relatable, Stuart. So good answer. How long has he been in the industry? Almost 300 cat years. So I don't know what cat years, translate to. I know dog years are 7 years. So I'll let you guys figure that out. 1 year is 7 years for dogs. So maybe it's 10 years for cats. So I'll guess 30 years, 30-ish, maybe?
A bit more than that, but yes, close enough.
I'll take it. His area of expertise, doing as instructed by she who must be obeyed. I'm guessing that's your wife. Is that your wife?
Yes, it is. It's actually a quote from a series of books called Rumpole of the Bailey by John Mortimer, and he wrote a series about a barrister who was an excellent barrister, but was constantly under the thumb of his wife. So it just seemed somewhat appropriate.
Seemed appropriate. Well, hey, happy wife, happy life, right? Oh man, and his favorite hobby, or what he does in his free time, I don't know that he knows what free time is. It's not written in his contract. So with
That's definitely true.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor to you, Stuart, to walk us through the best practices on optimizing your digital strategy.
Okay, thanks. Well, welcome everyone. Great to be back on Full Throttle again. I saw Andre Farah is from North Reading, and I thought, oh, North Reading, that's just up the road from me, because I'm in Maidenhead in the UK, and it had MA after it. And I'm not sure where MA is. It might be Massachusetts, so I'm probably not just up the road from you, Andre. So apologies for that. We're talking about technology and technology strategies. Really, where I want to try and start actually was not where technology starts, or sorry, where technology ought to start, but frequently doesn't, and that is in actually alignment with the business strategy. And obviously, many of you will be aware that some CIOs particularly get very excited about the actual platform footprints, and they lose sight of what the business strategy is. I was working for an organization a few years ago, actually, that had become obsessed with their desktop footprint. And the new CIO was obviously very keen to make an impression, and they brought in consultants to completely transform the company from Microsoft to Google Docs. Now, I have to preface this by saying I'm not a huge fan of Google Docs, because every document you have to end up reformatting, which, if you've got the number of documents that I have, is a major problem. But nonetheless, he transitioned the whole company from Microsoft to Google Docs, and it took him about 2 years to do it fully. And for the best part of 2 years, there were constant questions over exactly what the business benefit of this whole transition was. And the answer was always the same, because Google Docs is a lot cheaper. And anyway, he, as with many CIOs, lasted about 2.5 years. And then he was replaced by somebody else who, predictably enough, went, what the hell are we using Google Docs for? And they then spent another 2 years transitioning back to Microsoft. So that's my personal technology story, which ones that sits at the forefront of my mind. But that is clearly something that really wasn't business strategy driven. It was driven by an emotional, passionate hatred of Microsoft, and led to millions of pounds being invested in something that when he was no longer with the organization, they went back to the traditional way of doing things. So I think there is a lesson to be learned in there, and I think there's a question that you've always got to ask yourself: is, what is that? There's a certain amount of herd instinct in IT, and generally being in the herd is a good thing, because you get the herd provides you with the protection and the insulation. So unless there's a really, 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 really good reason not to go with the herd, there's a general sense that it is better to lag rather than lead in IT. Now, it's certainly true that in startups, they have the opportunity to lead, because they're building a business model on transforming things. But if my business is insurance, then, unless I have a really good insurance proposition, really, I'm not going to make any substantial amount of difference to my business, whether I'm on Google or Microsoft. And so, if there's some new whizzy insurance tech out there that's going to transform my offer to clients, then I'm all for it. If it's going to change the look and feel of my desktop, then I am absolutely not. Anyway, so that's my, how many minutes was that? It was about 10-minute rant, so that's good. We've got that out of the way. I've got it off my chest now. So let's talk about what I think you should do. So I'm just going to share my screen like this, and hopefully you will be able to see something in a minute. Okay, and my back phone tells me that I'm sharing. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about digital strategy because technologies and technology leading practice has to start from the digital strategy. And it's surprising, again, a lot of organizations actually don't have a well formulated digital strategy. And so there's no real target, there's no real improvement targets or measures to go for, and there's no process or mechanism to achieve them. Now, we do a lot of ERP replacements, as I'm sure many of you will know. And actually, even in the ERP space, it's a very bad place to start to say we need to replace our ERP. And in fact, one of our very first questions whenever a customer says that is, well, why? And so really what you need to be thinking is, where does the business want to be in 2, 5, 10 years time? And where does our technology strategy, what does our technology strategy need to be in order to support that? Now, it's very difficult, obviously, to predict what technology is going to look like in 10 years time. But given that the average life of an ERP is 10 years, in fact, it's about 11 now, I think, then 10 years is a good goal, a good vision reach in order to develop your strategy and in order to develop an effective one. So, first thing you find about digital strategies, and many of those that do exist, are not very cohesively thought through. And the first point, obviously here it says misalignment. Well, that's misalignment across a number of dimensions. It's misalignment with the business goals. And whilst it might appear on the face of it that the strategies are aligned, usually a little bit of scratching away at the strategy will reveal some glaring gaps or holes. And I'm going to use my Google Microsoft example a couple of times in this presentation, but that would be an example of what I would describe as a misalignment. And the reason I say that is quite simple. The business didn't want the platform changed. The CIO was persuaded coming into the organization that it was a good thing to do, and the board went along with it, but it wasn't something that was supporting any business strategy. So therefore, you started with a misalignment because the business really didn't want the faff of transitioning from one desktop platform to another. And despite the claim, it's not actually quite as simple as everybody makes out. There's not a 100% compatibility, and therefore it's effort. And if that effort is not bringing a really, really, really good return on investment, then the investment's not worth making. So we do lots of strategies. But the first thing we do in a strategy is actually we don't talk about the technology at all. And we try and look at where we believe the business is going to be in the strategic horizon that we're looking at. And we'll, again, do that over several windows. So typically, where do we want to be in 2 years? Where do we want to be in 5? And where do we want to be in either 7 or 10? And all of that will be a bit about what your business growth is, any increases in business complexity, whether you're on an acquisition strategy, whether you're on a divestment strategy, whether you want better cost optimization in the business. And all of those goals, which are business goals, can then be distilled into a set of technology actions in order to realize the business strategy. Now, they won't only be technology actions. And in fact, one of the things that we'll talk about in a couple of minutes is the importance of developing a target operating model before you get into talking about the strategy. So another client that we're currently involved in has end-of-life ERP, financials, and HCM system. and they're costly to run, and they don't do exactly what the business wants, and there's no common data, and so the obvious thing they go is, right, well, we're going to go for a replacement. Which one should it be? Should it be Workday? Should it be Oracle? Should it be SAP? And they've gone straight into the weeds of defining the detailed requirements for what I need out of this ERP or that ERP. Now, is that the place that most businesses start? Yes, it absolutely is. And it's almost always a mistake to start there, because unless you know what you want the business to become, what your organizational goals are, then all you're going to do is replace one piece of obsolete technology with a piece of shiny technology that's going to do the same job. So your opportunities for automation, cost optimization, process re-engineering, restructuring, whatever it is lost because you're not doing a transformation. You're not using the technology refresh as an opportunity to improve the business. You're using a transformation as an opportunity to replace obsolescent technology, which is still going to cost you $100 million, but your benefit out of that is going to be very, very small compared to what you could do if you've thought holistically about what you want to change. So how do we start this process off? Well, as I've mentioned before, we will ordinarily you define a target operating model. And so the first thing you need in a target operating model is you need to know what you do today. So typically a starting point would be we would do a process analysis, which is fairly high level. After we've done the business goals, which we talked about a little bit earlier, we'd identify, we typically do a process analysis. So we would just find out what all of your level 1 and your level 2 processes are. And then we would use a taxonomy for a whole variety of tasks. It's such a useful tool, but the taxonomy is basically there as the anchor of the scope of what you're trying to transform. And as it says there, you can use the taxonomy to identify pain points. You can use the taxonomy to identify areas of a high cost. You can use it to look at identify processes that have high customer or high colleague value. So it's got a variety of uses. And what we do is we rag the taxonomy red, amber, green. So that gives us areas of focus. So having gone through that process of defining the goals of the business, defining the process taxonomy, we then look at the alignment with the business goals by process. And we say, does it align or not? Yes, no. And then we do a technology assessment, say, well, what technology is supporting those processes? And then we will iterate around that until we start to coalesce on a course of action. And the course of action can be different for every client. So, for example, one of our clients has a very old ERP, but it works perfectly well. And it's old and it's technologically obsolescent, and the support is getting a bit worse for it. But they brought us in to do an ERP replacement. Now, 3 years on, we still haven't done the ERP replacement, but we have done a significant business transformation. And that's because in a lot of cases, nearly all of the pain in the business was all about how the business worked, not about the technology underpinning it. So it's around what we call dead fish. So someone upstream is polluting the data in a process. And as that process moves downstream, we are standing on the bank fishing, and we're finding that we're not getting many catches because most of the fish that are coming past us are dead. So, there's a clear call to action there to go and look at the upstream processes and the departments that are using those processes and find out why they are killing fish and why they are producing duff data. And that's not a problem that any new ERP solution is likely to resolve. If they were producing rubbish data before in the old ERP, there's an equal chance that they might continue to produce duff data in a new ERP. It'll just have prettier screens. So you can do an awful lot and actually in a lot of cases you can do an awful lot more by changing the operations of a business, changing the processes, improving the process metrics, increasing the learning, reducing the cost by moving offshore some functions. There are 100 ways that you can improve a particular function in a business without touching the technology. So we, oddly enough, for an ERP consulting firm, actually we advocate thinking about the technology almost last. That is the least important thing that you will worry about. And then when you do come to think about the technology, again, you're going to have a myriad of options. And in this particular client, we looked at each major capability that the business did. And we looked at that capability through the lens of what is the minimum footprint of change that we can do to that particular part of the business that will improve that business without creating a lot of disruption for the rest of the business. And so I can give you a couple of illustrative examples of that. The first is that we looked at accounts payable. And the accounts payable function in the ERP that was supporting the business is basically completely broken. And so what we did there was set up a new AP capability using Proactis. And Proactis has vendor portal capabilities. It has invoice automation capabilities, and it has much easier user interface to support business colleagues in procuring stuff. And that was implemented, and that was implemented almost as a standalone project. And then that was integrated back into the ERP, and the ERP's AP functionality was retired. And that was relatively painless, relatively non-disruptive. There were some change impacts to the way that AP was handled. Some of the AP was moved out to India. And there was some headcount shuffling about in the US and Europe. But that is a great example of how we have increased the capability of the business in a particular capability area, but without having to go through the huge cost, expense, and nightmare of changing the whole ERP for the whole business. And then we're currently doing the same in accounts receivable as well. So we've got the same organization. We're just finishing up a project to put in high radius to improve the day sales outstanding and improve the debt aging. And again, some of the functions that currently being supported in the US and the UK are going to be shifted to India. And actually, the cost of the software in that particular project is not the significant factor. In fact, we replace just two heads, or sorry, replace if we reduce our headcount by just two heads. The whole project is paid for over 5 years. But it's the improvement that we can get to the DSO that is really important, because that's millions of dollars sitting in the customer's bank account that should be sitting in ours. And that has an awful lot of impacts, like to your liquidity, your debt covenants, and all sorts of other things. So that tight coupling between the business goal, which is let's improve our DSO, let's manage our debt, do our liquidity management better, and the technology goal, which is to do things more efficiently, are absolutely aligned. And there's a clear linkage between the two, and the business case is really, really clear. Now, do you have to spend a long time on this process? No. And in fact, how we went about this was we did a number of workshops, and we got basically all the ideas for the future state. We looked at all the pain points. We got all the ideas for the future state down onto what I call initiative postcards. And these are basically hypotheses around what the future could look like. And what we do is we make the business people consultants for a day, and we give them the task of going and asking them to find out from Google and white papers and anywhere else they can, what leading practices in their particular area. And this is what we did for AR and AP. And we then ask those business colleagues to present to us as a project team as if they were the consultants and we were the customer. And so it's very interesting, because when they do that analysis themselves, they start to see what the art of the possible is, rather than having a consulting firm like us coming in and telling them what the answer is and them not believing us. So having got our initiative postcards, we can then prioritize them by complexity and by business value. And from that, we come up with a roadmap. And from the roadmap, we come up with a set of costs and a rollout, schedule, deployment schedule, and ultimately a program. And it's a very, very effective way. But the important thing about it is that because the prioritization is reviewed every 6 months, other things can come in and other things can move down. So it's a very dynamic process, but it's always aligning itself directly with the business strategy and the business goals. So I've talked a lot about that, but I can't emphasize how important it is, because it's so different to how many organizations view their digital strategy. I see countless ones saying, well, we must be more on the internet and we must be doing better with our e-commerce. And we must be better on social media. And those are interesting things, and they're probably correct. But being able to tie that very tightly back to the business goals and the business alignment is where I think a lot of these strategies fall down. Particularly, business understanding of its core drivers, and in fact we'll talk about that shortly. So hopefully I've made the case for having a good strategy, and then of course once you've got your initiatives prioritized, you will be kicking off one or more projects for each of those initiatives, and those will change the organizational's ability to deliver. And so again, that is not just we're going to put in a piece of technology. If you're doing this right, you will change the organization, the skills, you'll change people, you'll change processes, you'll change the systems, the tech, you'll change the data, potentially, you'll change the reporting and the drivers and KPIs and metrics, again, if you're doing it properly. And you'll be looking at risks and controls and governance. I got it in the wrong order. Governance, risks and controls, apologies, GRC, and the wider kind of security framework into which the project will fall. And so you'll see that there's a couple of other things in this definition of an op model, like centers of excellence and customer experience and voice of the customer. And again, those are equally valid. There is no real formal definition of what an operating model is, and I define it as anything that is required for an organization to deliver on its customer promise effectively. So if it's a compliance framework, that could equally be in a operating model as a business process or a piece of software. So does that mean that we can forget all about all the tin that's sitting in our data center? Well, the answer is no. And again, there is absolutely always value in looking at your current portfolio of applications and your physical infrastructure and your skills and again, in this context, again, I mean, we the client that we're working with at the moment, we looked at the applications portfolio and we found that there were 200 applications that will be impacted by the replacement of the ERP and the HR system. and all of that was very interesting. And actually, through the analysis, we actually found that about 14 of them we were still paying for, and they were completely unused. In fact, that people had stopped using them a number of years ago, and nobody had realised. And so, it is important to make sure that your current portfolio of applications is absolutely clearly aligned to a business capability, and that it's still valid and in use. Because if you have an application that is in your data center, it is using up your electricity and it's depreciating off your books. It's got physical infrastructure, and if you've gone to the nth degree extreme, then you might even be replacing infrastructure for an application that you're not using. So having that close eye on what your part of the jigsaw is really important. Now, again, in physical infrastructure, in many organizations now, unless you're very, very, very large, most organizations now have gone away from physical infrastructure. Certainly over here, it's now becoming relatively uncommon to find a company having its own data center. Usually it will have been outsourced to a managed service provider. The idea of managing physical infrastructure is much less of a concern. But again, we still see problems in physical infrastructure due to lead times required for a managed service provider to install a new bit of kit to run this service. And I think that's partly why cloud is becoming so increasingly popular from the adoption, because firstly, you don't have this huge lag in getting that infrastructure in place. Secondly, it's much less costly to get cloud infrastructure added to an application as a platform as a service or software as a service than it is to effectively increase your own hosting footprint. And then, of course, there's the support as well. And again, if you're paying for support for applications that are not being used, then that's clearly not optimal. But overall, your physical infrastructure will be larger if your current portfolio of applications is not being used 100%. So there's clearly some ongoing investigation needed to make sure that your portfolio of infrastructure and your portfolio of applications is all relevant. Now, in terms of current business and IT skills of current business and IT employees, it's important to know that. It's certainly important to know it from a cost perspective. Truthfully, if you are actually going to do a transformational strategy around IT, there will be a number of skill sets that will fall by the wayside. Having lots and lots of programmers in technologies that are 10 or 15 years old will continue to be important until those applications have been replaced and are no longer in use, and then those skills are not going to be needed. And so again, in your 3, 5, 7 year, 10-year plan, you need to be thinking about what that looks like and what that transition approach is, and whether you're going to retrain those employees, whether you're going to redeploy them, or whether you're going to release them, and what that headcount transition looks like over a number of years. And then the fourth point on there is about architecture and points of integration. So we'll come back to this in a minute. But architecture is becoming increasingly complex, and points of integration have always been quite complex, but they're becoming more complex. So the skill sets that you need in terms of architecture and integration are probably a lot more pivotal to your business than they were maybe 10 years ago. And that's especially true of organizations that are adopting a mixed cloud and non-cloud strategy in their provision of business services. And then finally, obviously, there's data, forms and reports. I mean, I'm not really that interested in forms and reports, but I am very interested in data, because most businesses cannot say where data starts, where it flows, and where it ends. And they can particularly not say that when you want to take the middle of that data flow out, like the ERP, and stick something else in its place. And until you know that, you can't do an ERP replacement, you can't do an HCM replacement, you can't do a CRM replacement, you can't do anything. Because unless you know what you're going to interfere with in your data flow and how it's going to look when it comes out the other side, then you can't touch it. And I've known organizations that have come considerably unstuck by saying, well, the middleware will sort that out, and we'll just transform the data out of the ERP so it looks like it was the same data as the old one. And that strategy has, in my experience, never worked. So if you've made it work, please tell us how, because as I said, data is a particular problem in businesses. Quality is a problem, and data flow understanding is a problem. Master data management is a problem, and those are common in every single business, or nearly every single business. Now, I talked about assessing current performance measures, and again, I'm an old IT person. I've been doing IT since 1984 when I started on IBM mainframe, so I'm not against IT in any way, but I think there's too much emphasis on IT looking at itself rather than IT looking at itself in the context of the wider business. Now, most organizations are able to benchmark their own IT and the cost of IT against other organizations. We do some strategies. The strategies that we do usually take into account some form of benchmarking, where we will look at the cost of IT as a percentage of revenue, and we will compare that to industry to other IT organizations in the same industry, for companies that are roughly equally sized, and say, well, they're 2% and you're 4%, so why are you 4? And then we do the analysis to look at that. And the same is true, we do that with finance as well. So we'll say, well, your finance costs you 4% of your revenue and it should be 2. Why? Because you've got 120 people and everybody else has got 60. So those are typically what you'd get. And then you go into the more deep dive, which is around maturity assessment and around benchmarking, the process-based benchmarking, et cetera, to understand why the cost profile wasn't meeting industry-leading practice. So that's all very obvious. What's more interesting, though, is actually organizations, some of the very advanced organizations are actually moving on to something called driver-based rolling forecasting. It's available on YouTube if you want to look it up. It's called Beyond Budgeting, it's also known as. And a lot of organizations work on a zero budget forecast. So you'll get 12 months worth of budget, and then at the end of 12 months, that budget will be zeroed, and you'll pitch for the next 12 months based on what you believe you will spend in terms of change, using last year's budget as a starting point. And Beyond Budgeting does something quite different. It says that you're going to have a budget two budgets, actually. One is to run the run operation, which we expect to be broadly static but improved on every year by whatever percentage point that is, 2%, 1%, 5%, whatever. And we will measure that every quarter to see whether or not that budget is the actuals are meeting our budget expectation. And then for the business transformation change budget, again, there won't be a budget set at the beginning of the year. You will get a cash allocation out of a capital pool to do whatever projects are approved. And then those again will be assessed each quarter based on their outturn, their cost value, etc., etc., and the budget will be varied according to the the performance. Now, where this is, so in IT, this isn't terribly interesting because most IT organizations already do some part of that. But it's much more interesting in operational parts of the business because these drivers should be directly aligned to the key business metrics. So, for example, an organization like EasyJet, which is an airline, if you didn't know, will have 7 key drivers of the business. It will have parking and ground costs. It'll have en route costs. It'll have flight crew utilization and flight pay. It'll have revenue per seat. It'll have in-flight services, and it'll have add-ons. Gosh, I actually remembered all 7 this time. And each of those will have a particular target. But then every target that sits underneath it will be rolled up to one of those metrics. So if there's a cost in IT, though that cost will either be apportioned or it'll be directly aligned against one of those. So, for example, the system that supports the electronic point of sale systems and the inventory management for the in-aircraft sales will be directly apportioned to that key driver of the business. And so if there's a better, cheaper, more productive product, then that's the driver that it will impact. And that makes it much easier for a business to decide what to invest in and how to manage its business without having this ludicrous process of saying at the end of 12 months, right, next year we're going to give you another 3 million. Thank you very much, get on with it. So becoming quite talked about in finance organizations. Wait for it to come down to you from them, because it's quite a different way of thinking. So we're talking about systems. I said I was going to talk about systems last, and actually I am going to talk about systems last, and I'm only going to probably talk about it for a couple of minutes. You can have lots of different types of strategies. You can have a big ERP solution. And actually what we're seeing now is more in the way of going back to unified platforms. So unified platforms were popular about 10 years ago. So I was in a telco, and they replaced lots of disparate systems for billing and CRM and ERP, sorry, general ledger, and they migrated all onto Oracle. And then it became popular to not have everything on all in one system and to have a best of breed approach, which was similar to what I'd been describing with our client earlier, where they had AP best of breed, and then they had AR best of breed. And now we're seeing the swing back again. And the reason that we see this swing is because joining platforms together with service-orientated architecture solutions or middleware, like MuleSoft or Delboomi or WSO2, is very complex. And even though the salesman will tell you how easy it is never as easy as they say it's going to be. And we've seen a number of organizations get into quite a lot of trouble, both trying to write the integration architecture and do the transformations, and then with the cost. So, for example, my experience, WSO2 is by far and away the most complex and difficult to write integrations for, by several orders of magnitude. Yes, it's open source, and yes, that's fun and exciting. But in terms of how complex and easy it is for me to implement, I don't want exciting, I want easy. And then MuleSoft, which many of you will know has been bought by Salesforce, is actually a very, very good, great piece of software. But they charge by the transaction, and the bills that come in every month or every quarter can make your eyes drop out, especially if you didn't know that's how much you were using it before you started and didn't negotiate a good contract. And my personal favorite, I think I would call it the least ugly sister if I was to characterize all of these, is Delboomi. again, I've had success with Dell Boomi, but it's still a long way from being as easy to easy to implement as the salesman used to maintain. So with the adoption of cloud and with mixed architectures, cloud and on-prem, then this middleware is essential to any business to be able to make this all hang together. I think, as I mentioned earlier, my sense is that we're going to see a drift back to unified platforms, but in this case, they'll all be cloud-based unified platforms. And I think the idea of having a huge data center full of legacy systems will fall to a few, specific organizations like banks and telcos. And I think the general organizational population will move increasingly to cloud. So look, there we go. That was 42 minutes of my thoughts on where technology strategies should be and how you develop one. Happy for any questions, or thank you very much. Okay, how do I stop screen sharing? There I go. Okay. All right.
Good stuff. Do we have any questions from the audience, whether you're on?
Did that align with what you were expecting to hear about, or did you expect me to talk about byte 2 of bit 6 of the SDLC 3270 data stream? Because if anybody wants me to talk about that, I can talk about that for an hour or two. In fact, I've got a 3270 right on, I haven't. It's a PDP-8 and a VT131, if you can see that. Very happy to talk about technologies from the 1960s and the 1980s too. No? I guess we're all done then. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, I recommended MuleSoft for the best middleware. It's certainly the one that's been most commonly deployed, and I haven't heard of it being unsuccessful anywhere, certainly in Europe. And I've know of a reasonably large number of companies using it. So from that perspective, MuleSoft has got itself ahead of steam, particularly because it's all a lot of the Salesforce are now pushing it so heavily. I think that Dell Boomi is tending to get better footprint in the SME sized business. Excuse me. Particularly in the SME sized business. And WSO2, as I said, WSO2's big claim to fame is it's the one used by eBay. We've got a microphone muting problem. Try that. Oh, what's going on here? Somebody has unmuted me. Excuse me. Sorry, I had my phone muted because I can see you on the phone and see what I'm presenting here, and somebody unmuted me. Thank you very much. So WSO2 is a open source middleware, and one of our clients used it because they thought it was cool to be open source, as far as I can tell. This was the same client who decided Google was better than Microsoft. And it was eye-wateringly expensive to implement because nobody knew how to do it. So there was no WSO2 experience to speak of, to call on. And when we compared the cost per interface of building a WSO2 interface to one either on MuleSoft or Dell Boomi, it was 4 or 5 times as expensive, and took about twice as long. So it's not, I don't know what they're like now, this is several years ago, but it certainly wouldn't be one that I would recommend to a customer any more than I would recommend any of these cloud open source ERP platforms that everybody who is a bit funky and lives in California keeps raving on about, like Odoo. I'm a dinosaur. I'm not like one of these new age hippies, right? You know, I don't go with the cool and the new. I'm quite happy with the old. Has that answered your question, Cash? Okay. Okay, I think we're done. They asked, is there an agenda for the remaining sessions?
There is indeed. I can put that in the chat box, but just to verbalize it and give you the next session, we have Wayne covering business and system architecture here in a few minutes, and then we'll have Daryl close it out with data and cybersecurity. So I'll put that in the chat as well.
Okay, everyone.
Stuart, thank you. Thank you so much. That was so insightful. It sounds like a lot of it comes back to business goals and understanding, you know, just what does your business want to be when it grows up? What's the future state? And working backwards from there. So thank you again, Stuart. We appreciate your insights. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and take just a few minute break. We will meet back here in about 5 minutes or so. Give you a second to do whatever you need to do, and we will come back in 5 minutes to hear from Wayne Holtham. Welcome back. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and keep it rolling. We are excited to get into the next section. Now, this one's going to be all around system architecture. Wayne Holtham, he's the Vice President of Third Stage Consulting in Asia Pacific. And he's actually been the pioneer, I'd say, on, discussing all things business architecture. He recently put out an episode on our Digital Stratosphere podcast about functional architecture. He wrote a blog post about it recently, an article that you could find on the Third Stage website. And today he's here with us and he's going to dive into it even further. So as Wayne comes up on the stage, I want to give his backstory. Now, he's calling in from Brisbane, Australia. He has been in the industry for over 30 years, and he's specifically focused on enterprise technology, change management, training, solutions, and functional architecture just all around the digital transformation industry. And he's really become a thought leader as well. So we're excited to have him talk about it. And of course, it's important to know that this guy, he loves camping. He loves the outdoors. He spends a lot of his time RVing across Australia and, when time permits, traveling around the world. Now, I bet a lot of traveling hasn't happened for you, Wayne, in the recent year, given the pandemic, and I'm sure you have an itch to get out, so hopefully you can start jet setting again soon to explore. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Wayne, if you want to talk a little bit about architecture.
Thanks, Parasia. That's great. And I forgot to mention that I do a bit of crocodile wrestling every now and again as well. So out here we get a chance to do that. So you guys have got to do alligators. So let me just share my screen here, and let's how do we get that to work? Window. Here we go. Okay, can we see my screen? That's probably the main thing that we want to be able to make sure. So.
Yep, we can see it.
Excellent. Hopefully it's coming up there now, is it? Because I can't see my screen. That doesn't help, does it? Let's just go back out of that and go back into where we were, full throttle. And we'll try and share that again. Sorry about that. No, it's not letting me do that. So sharing, so stop. Apologies for this. Come on.
Gotta love.
Battle of technology, unfortunately, and we're in that game of technology. So let me see how I can work through this one. So we will try again. And we want to go window. Edge tab. Share. No, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. Why aren't we doing it? There we go. Let's just try something else. It mucked up my audio before, so apologies for this. This should allow me to Right, I'm back here. Hopefully we can share the screen now. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, so thank you. Let's go find this now. We will go here, share, and it's still not letting me do it, is it? extra sorry, folks. Extra sorry. It's a great presentation. One day we'll get to see it. So, so we'll try this now. So there. Screen 2. So we'll see if we can bring this on the screen too. There we go. Look at this. Now we're getting there. Technology is not beating me. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can. Nice.
Excellent. That's great. All right. Thank you very much. So let's get into it now. We've fluffed around enough, and thank you, Stuart, for providing a whole lot of segues into architecture and the discussion. It's one of my passions is architecture. I've been around the game. I say 25 years. I probably am cutting that short because I don't want to feel as old as I probably am. So, but I have been around the game in the sense that work with a lot of the big 5 consulting organizations, working through digital transformation, working through change, working through those sort of areas. But I suppose the speciality for me is about delivering clients the best change. And so part of the reason why third stage is very important to me is we're client focused as such. And so how many times do we actually have this experience when we've delivered a transformation project? And this is probably just reflective of what the silliest sense would be is that it doesn't always go to plan. So and there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't go to plan. Many times we really don't understand who we are, what we do, why we have the pain points we have. And so having the challenge where what we deliver at the end of the day ends up being vastly different and often not as efficient as what we had envisaged at the start. But we've got to have very drained bank accounts along the way. So this is one of those things that I see often where we get deployments and it's just doesn't make sense. And so but let's get into what is business and systems architecture for digital programs. So it essentially sets the foundation to and a blueprint to align, things Stuart talked about, the operating model. Today we have ERPs that are based on applications. So they are an application within, a context of what we call an ERP. And so, you might find that in the world of, if we talk about SAP, they have applications like the HCM, which is Success Factors, and you have Ariba and those sort of other areas. They're all SAP as such, but they are applications that fit, leverage, integrate, supposedly plug straight into, the standard core ERP that might be out there. Then you'll have other options where, you'll have more of an end-to-end view. If you're a manufacturing type architecture you might have a lot closer links between supply chain, and you'll have modules that actually really, really fit closely together, because it's very important to have that seamless approach, then bolting on different applications to actually deliver a solution. And so the key thing when we talk about application architecture is about saying, if we're going to have all of these particular applications, how do they bolt together? And, as Stuart alluded to, some people use things like middleware and they use MuleSofts and those sort of things, but that just adds to complexity. And so it's one of those, if it's possible, the simpler it is, the easier it is to manage, the more seamless it is with the information flow. And I think there's the trade-off that we have is where we have lots of applications, we're very complex, and we are constantly recontextualizing information. And that is one of the, I suppose, the frustrations when it comes to reporting, because then we say, well, which numbers are we actually reporting? What are we doing? What's the information? How do we know it's actually still as in the same context as what it originally started at? And so application architecture is probably just the foundation level that we need to consider. It's about thinking, well, how are we going to actually get information back out of this? How do we know what we're doing? How do we actually have simplicity in the way we approach things? The second thing, obviously, is solution definition with the end-to-end. So what we're looking for, if we've got a technology platform that is there to support the business. And we talk about supporting finance, supporting procurement, supporting our resource, our people, supporting the services we offer. Might be supply chain, might be warehouse, might be, asset management, might be whatever. But what we're looking for is that we have people inputting information, or we're capturing information. We want to be able to roll that up so we can actually report on that information, or be able to see how we're doing, performance manage. And so solution definition has taken this trend where we are looking at end to end. It's no longer where we provide someone some information, they plug it into the system, and and we've got a few users using a system that manages or runs the business under, as the underpinning layer. We now have many more people involved in the software solution. And so understanding the process taxonomy, and this is a word I picked up from Stuart. It shows that the English language is alive and well, because it's taxonomy is I think a really good description of what we talk about when we talk about end-to-end processes. It's got a lot of layers and a lot of integrations you've got to consider to be able to achieve end-to-end. And obviously, as we're working through it, there's change requirements. So if we've got something that's very, very complex to use and very hard to manage, then the hardest thing with that is being able to get people to use it. Because let's face it, technology is only as good as the people's ability to be able to use it. And if it's not intuitive to use, if it's not simple, people usually opt out, and we end up where we have duplication of systems. We end up where people don't put the right information in because it's too hard to do, sort of thing. And so trying to get people aligned, and those change requirements that we need are a key piece in what we need to consider when we talk about business and systems architecture. And then the integration of those applications that actually deliver on what our functionality is. And so for me, it's a number of areas there that we talked about. And I think Stuart touched on some of these. And as we get a little bit deeper, you'll start to see that it's less about the technology. It's about how we want the technology to behave, and what we can get out of that technology. And if I was to talk to any of the software vendors, usually the first thing you ask them is, could your software do this? And the first response is, yes, sure, we can do that. But then when you actually get into deployment and you start to deliver, you find, but you meant that. We didn't really think that you meant that level of detail. And so we would have to do certain things to actually change what we do and how we do it, sort of thing. So that is one of the big challenges that we face, is technology vendors or software vendors come in and provide us this simplistic view that their software will fix all. But if we don't know a lot about ourselves as an organization, it makes it very difficult for us to be able to be able to guide them on what we actually are needing. And so, often we overlook the fact that, technology is all you need. There's far more to the fact that technology is a cog in the wheel. It's something that supports us, but it can be as big an inhibitor to how we go about what we do as it is a benefit. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. We cannot underestimate the fact that technology is only a part of the puzzle. One area that I think happens is organizations evolve, and as Stuart mentioned, he's been around for a long time, and I can attest to the same thing, having less hair and a lot grayer than it used to be, is that we sort of have lost touch in what we actually do as an organization. And this was an interesting discussion that I've learnt over the years, that when you ask someone, what business are you in, they often look at you with a puzzled look and go, I'm in whatever business. So it might be, if I'm in, say I'm a basketball player. So I'm a basketball player. I'm in sport. Well, these days you're actually in entertainment. And so it's that subtle shift that we need to be able to consider of what our organization is, and reflecting on that in a sense of government utilities, where they supply electricity. In the past we would have said, well, they're an electricity supplier, but today they're actually a infrastructure provider, and they provide a network for us to be able to have electricity. So the service they deliver is actually electricity supply. But the way they go about it is they are infrastructure as a service to be able to manage all those assets to maintain that supply for us. And so when we talk about losing touch, what we do is our focus changes from being, yes, we want to be able to service or supply something, but we also need to be able to make sure that we can actually cost effectively manage that. And if we understand what business we're in, then we are very, very clear on what technology we need and how we want that technology to behave. Digital platforms, offer end-to-end, but it's not that easy. And so as Stuart alluded to earlier, is the fact that we have this thing where we can plug software in and it's a lot more open and easy is what they say. But when you start seeing the complexity that can be created by, middleware and the challenges that are posed by using, the different languages between, or the different philosophies between how different applications operate, then you run the risk that as you're looking for information, or as you're trying to manage data flow from end to end sort of thing, you actually have a mismatch. And then then there's a lot of work in trying to recontextualize that, revisualize that, reimagine what that actually is going to look like. And so it's really important that when you consider what your systems architecture is going to be, that simplicity is the first thing you should be considering. It's everyone will say, oh no, it's easy, we'll just add this in. But, there's all those hidden things like costs. It's the complexity, the information flow, as I've mentioned there. And digital transformation is not seen as it should be. Many times we think, well, we've got a software platform at the moment and we'll just add another one in there. It can't be that hard, But what we find is we've evolved over time, and I liken it to the fact that, we started off with, say, a single story house, and what we've done is build 5, 6, 10 stories on top of that. But what struggles is the foundation that it all sits on. So we almost have to reset that foundation. And an organization I worked with recently, in the sense that, they were a SAP house. They'd been around SAP for 20 odd years, and they'd eventually done the upgrades. But when it actually came to doing digital transformation, they realized that their underpinning infrastructure, they were going to the cloud. They had people that actually were now going to use mobility devices that they hadn't done before because they had someone loading that data in. It changed their whole world, in the sense that from an infrastructure perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, everything else changed. So it's about saying, well, what is going to change in our organization as a result of this upgrade or way we're going to do business in the future? And digital transformation is obviously often a trigger for that. We've got solutions that are out of service. We've got those sorts of things, or no longer supported, or it's costing us more because the vendor is charging us more to support them. There's a greater trend now where for software providers, it's easier to say, well, we're not going to support something forever, so we'll actually either charge you more or force you to change to either our new suite of products. And that's probably opening up a whole different world for people, because they say they're starting to evaluate, is that brand or that vendor that I had before, is that still fit for purpose for me in my new context of business? Organizations don't recognize the complexity that they build over time. And I think that, it's again back to that utility space. One time we didn't sort of consider the customer as much. We divested what we did. We had particular areas of the business that focused on it. Whereas now we look at more of that view of saying, well, we want to service our customer right from not only providing their electricity, but also their connections and other things that might happen. So we've extended, which has created complexity. So no longer are we looking at just our particular area, or even the mining space. We not only look at just what we are in mining, we actually look at the logistics and the supply chain from sourcing the materials to actually supplying them to our customers. And so we have added complexity into what we do, and we're expecting that technology should just fit together and just work with that. And as we realize, that is harder and harder to achieve unless we really understand what we're looking for. And digital transformation is complex, the devil really is in that detail. And it's interesting. Solution integrators will come in and they love doing, high level process maps, and they do all of those sorts of things, and they never really consider how the business is actually operating, what really is causing that devil to come out, in the sense that the challenges we have that we're seeing are often symptoms of the root causes that lie underneath. And so once we understand that detail requirement, we then get much closer to delivering on the expectation, actually building something of an architecture. It's like, say, walking into a car dealership and saying, I want a car, and you're not telling the salesman that you actually have 6 children and you like to go camping on the weekends, and he's trying to sell you a Corvette. It really is one of those things that is the thing we need to really understand. What is the detail that sits behind it? And it's influence from the operating model. It impacts process. It impacts technology. It impacts the configuration, the way we configure that technology, and the change people need to go through. Because at the end of the day, the reason we're actually using technology is it's to be able to provide us a level of value to deliver what we do. And that's an important fact that we really shouldn't underestimate. Functional outcome over technology solution. To me, this is ultimate utopia, in the sense that we need to look at how it functions. Technology. Many people have the view that if we put technology in, that's the guide of what we do. But what you find is that someone's developed a technology platform or a series of processes that do that, and you find, are they functional for what we do as an organization? And so it's a real challenge when it's that balancing act of saying, well, Mr. Vendor, I hear what you're saying, but what is the functional, how's that going to function for me? So if I've got people in the field putting information in, how is that information going to come back in? How am I going to manage the quality of that information? How am I going to do all of those sorts of things? And that's the bit that often they sort of have a bit of a shudder and realize that, that's a bit more thinking to go through that. And functionality comes from that simplified end-to-end focused architecture. So it's about saying, well, if we are going to make sure that this is as seamless as we possibly can do, we have to see what sits either side of what our particular focus is. And so if we're actually picking up something or handing off something and it's not right, it's not to the level that we need it to be, then obviously our information is not going to be, or what we're doing, our processor is interrupted. And then we add more complexity because we build workarounds to actually manage that. Simplicity over complexity. It's interesting. I've recently did some enterprise strategy for an organization, and we had a lot of providers come in and say, oh, we can put in this middleware and it'll link this best of breed and all of those sorts of things. And there is a trend at the moment where people go, well, maybe I should be best of breed everything. And we just link it together because technology allows us to do that. But does it add that layer of complexity that sort of undermines what we're trying to do? And so, and in that becomes the cost of ownership and those sorts of things that we have to consider when we do that. And for me, one of the big things that's come out in recent years is, we look at processes that we actually do, and many times we have arduous exercises of determining what processes are the as is, and then we build a future state. I believe that what we should be looking at is what are we actually doing? Because if I was to probably talk to every person in an organization, I would guarantee that many times we do the same thing many different ways. And but if we roll that up to a higher level, yes, we're probably trying to get a similar outcome, but these workarounds, that devil in the detail, is what brings us undone. And so it's really identifying what is the simplified process and how many deviations do we have from that, so we can actually start to get closer to people doing things in a consistent way, interpreting what they need, how they do it, and the way that the outcome is delivered in a similar type way. And so that's a big one for me. Right technology fit over big brand. And more and more you start to see where we've got, really, I suppose, popular brands in the marketplace, your SAPs, your Oracles, your Microsofts, all coming into the marketplace. And the big problem you have is that they have this ability to be able to market and influence, your Gartner quadrants and those sorts of things. But are they the right fit for what we need to do? And I think as we evolve to cloud options, we evolve to SaaS options, it's something we've really got to consider. Just because I'm buying, say, SAP, and I'm buying SuccessFactors, which is an SAP product application, or I'm buying Ariba, which is an SAP application, or I'm buying, Concur or Fieldglass. Do they all just fit together and plug seamlessly together because they all fit under that big banner of SAP? Well, in reality, no, they don't. And they are separate organizations that have been brought together and actually bring out that almost like a best of breed, but under one brand. And so what we need to consider is what is the best way that we can actually achieve what we're looking to do. So, without adding to that complexity. And business operating model over best practice. And it's interesting, Eric and I did a podcast just recently, and we talked about this in the sense that, there are some areas of the business that best practice makes sense. If I'm processing invoices, I'm doing accounts payable, I'm doing those sorts of things, how many different ways can you do it? There's probably thousands of ways that organizations do it globally, but there is probably a common thread there on how you would continue to do it in a consistent, standard way without the complexity. But when you start getting into how I operate, what my value driver is, how I actually work as an organization, then no technology provider can really actually apply just best practice on that. So, even utilities, miners, they all have different contexts, different ways that they work or different business models. And so if we were to turn around and say, well, hang on, we'll make everybody best practice, then many times we'd be probably bringing people back in their ability to be able to be competitive in a marketplace. And so, as we talk about the symptoms, difficult to get user adoption if we have this complexity. If we, require technology to address the gaps. So what you find is we'll get halfway through an implementation and realize that we hadn't considered that there are certain gaps. And so then we start adding extra technology in to actually cover those gaps. Efficiency loss. So, the big thing is that if we become less efficient, then the cost to transact becomes greater. And so we get affected in our bottom line. And so that's something as an organization, it's not what we want to be, sort of thing. And so, operating model conflicts with the technology functionality. So what you find is, here's what we offer as a service, and all of a sudden we've got technology that almost competes with that. And that's not a good place to be. And that's where a lot of these failures get recognized, in the sense that all of a sudden we've got technology in here and we actually can't deliver the service as we had envisaged we would deliver that service. The business case value is unrealizable, and that's one of the big areas that we see often in new technology, is the fact that we determine a business case, but that value that's actually put forward on why we're actually doing the change or putting in the new technology, we never ever realize that value again. And often that value is a cost that is a burden to us as we continue to move forward. Solution design with an organization at the moment where, they've bought technology in and they're trying to make their technology the same as the technology they had. And so it's an engineering group. And so they're looking to tweak everything they can. And so, solution design windows can't be closed off. So we can't actually get in to actually deliver this, because we're constantly evolving, changing, adding, which is cost, which is time, which is, obviously, how can we keep adding more money into the budget? Eventually you've got to have that line in the sand as such. And so that's an area that challenges, and that leads to those cost and time blowouts. And scope, and the challenge of that is that as we get to a point where we must deliver, we end up putting in a reduced scope, which takes us back to the start where we're actually trying to address, we had this functionality, we had this expectation that we were going to address it and fix it. We get to the end of the way we've actually delivered it and the complexity we've provided, and we've actually got a less of a scoped item. So we have less functionality, and then we've got to go back and do the exercise again and try and regain that functionality. And duplication. Many times if we don't do the change piece right, we end up where we have people doing things the old way or their way, and we have what technology is guiding us to do or what we've actually developed in technology. And that's something that, is a problem when we don't really understand a clear business operating model and how that business should actually be operating. And that's driven down through the different areas of the business. I feel, I look at this and I think that the one thing that depicts this for me and probably hopefully puts it in perspective when we talk about business architecture, systems architecture, organizational structure and processes, they are all layers. And just like we have layers of an onion in this instance here, if we aren't clear on our business architecture, what business are we in? Where do we derive our value? And I think Stuart talked a lot about this, and this is part of that strategy piece. If we don't understand what we are, what context, what our model should be, then how can we actually start then to influence systems technology? And many times what happens is we start at the systems level, and we fail to consider whether we have changed as an organization, whether our operating model is still the same as it should be, whether we actually deliver the services that we do, whether we're measured the same. And so you can see where that mismatch starts to happen. And then, we might come in and put systems in, but do we actually look at the org structure? Is it that we actually have departments that actually don't deliver or don't support how the system has been set up? And so often you start to see where, if we're a organization where we are delivering, say, lots of projects, we'll have a structure that's set up that actually manages those projects, but the technology is looking at some of the other things that we're actually doing. So some of the finances, some of those other areas. And so the system architecture almost competes with the way that we actually are set up. And so we need to consider, what is it that we actually are doing as an organization, which should be influenced from that operating model, business architecture, and it all layers its way down to the point that we start saying, well, now we've got people in the organization, we have technology, which both have processes. How do we align those processes so we end up where those processes don't compete with each other? And so systems architecture is what applications we have, but also drives what technology processes sit within that. And our config or our application architecture, our functional architecture also drives how we're actually going to deliver those processes. And so you can see how integrated or interweaved everything is, and it all relies on having the different layers, and those layers need to be influencing the other and building and leveraging on the other part of the organization. And so, business architecture is commonly defined as business structure, although the component of structure needs to be considered, if we have, if we have multi-entity or we have company or site, and often that's what we consider as business architecture. But from my view, it's deeper than that. It's the sense of how do we operate? What do we do? An organization that we've just finished an engagement with, we talked about business architecture, and so they went off and got Bain & Co. to actually look at how they should actually operate as entities. Should they be centralized? Should they be decentralized? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how we operate as an organization, as a business, as a cohort of people delivering a service as such. And I think that's the big difference that we have when we talk about it. It's less about the technology, but if we don't consider how we want that technology to work, then technology is not going to fix our problem. The myths that we start seeing, common myths is technology vendor is the world's best practice. So we don't need the step of building architecture, because all of a sudden we'll just ask the provider. Technology provider will come in and say, it's okay, we've got this model or this particular focus in our offering. SAP is very good at this in the sense that they have utilities, or they'll have a mining, or they'll have a transport, technology solution. But that doesn't take away the need to actually make sure our business architecture is very solid, and see where those gaps are between what that specialist option that the provider might offer, and where those gaps are, because there will be a significant amount of functionality gaps that sit within that. The solution integrator has a model or a framework for this, and we see that having worked for many of the larger system integrators or solution integrators, you find that they leverage. We've got a model that actually fits your organization. Well, they say the same thing to every organization they walk into. So is it that they're trying to provide the cookie cutter approach, and that's what frameworks can obviously lead you to? Or should they actually be really understanding what you do? Do they ask those questions, or are they just applying a framework? And these are things that we find often lead to where failures happen, because a system integrator's applied a particular framework, but really not in tune with what that particular business, in the way it's contextualized, the market it's in, what drivers are, what disruptions it's happening are actually leading to its architecture to be challenged. It's aligning with your business structure model. That again is the fact of where we have this view of, well, I've got 5 entities globally stretched around the world, sort of thing, and so that's all I need to worry about, that I've just got these entities and we need to report into that. No, it's how do we want those entities to add value. And so business architecture is that complete piece that actually brings together all of that. It's not just about that high level reporting. It's not just about saying, well, we're structured as a decentralized model or a centralized model. It's about understanding, well, how do we derive value in what we do? How do we function to deliver our service isn't important. And that's one that really is a struggle for me to listen to, because if we don't function effectively, and it's interesting, how have many of the disruptors come into the marketplace and been able to push all of the market share apart and actually create their own market? It's because they are very clear on how they function, what they offer, why they are different, and what their competitive edge is. And when they actually have that defined, you see the inefficiencies with many of these organizations who really don't appreciate that, understanding an operating model and cascading that down through the organization. What are we really in business for? How do we bring value? Then we are caught out when we have a disruptor come into the marketplace and we're left struggling, or we're left wanting. Systems architecture. Technology vendor has focused solution for the industry, and I talked about that a little bit earlier, in the sense that we've got these fit for purpose type modules or solutions that the vendor comes in with. They may be high level, and they've probably got a number of the key areas that are focus areas, so you're not bringing in things that you're not going to use, or less of those, but they still need to be configured, they still need to be applied, they still need to actually fit your context. And so the view that systems architecture, because you're bringing in just a technology-focused solution, really is a myth. Technology vendor has the world's best practice, so we don't need that step. Once again, it's a real challenge in the sense that, yeah, sure, for our finances, for those sort of things, that might ring true. But when we actually talk about, and I think in lots of times you talk about the competitive edge, the secret sauce, the reason we are in business and successful as we are, we need to be able to make sure that best practice is being able to be delivered. And a technology vendor with best practice just brings everybody to the same level. And that's, I suppose, one of the challenges we have, leveraging best practice as against leveraging best practice for you as an organization, so which will be distinctly different from someone else in the same actually industry in many cases. Solution integrator has a model or a framework for this, and And once again, it's one of those things where, we work a lot in the utility space, or we work a lot in the mining space. So we've got a framework that we can actually apply. We've got all of these high level processes. Again, once you get the devil in the detail, you realize that's where they go off track, is the fact that the high level frameworks, unless they're applied and they're actually built with the context of what your organization is, then they struggle. And again, it's not a technology thing. It's actually understanding your business. And this is where we often find that people focus on technology only, as against understanding really what they want, what they need, how they work, and what they should do, and then let the technology fit within where it should fit with that. And we can really build a very, very close relationship if we understand that. And solution over function outcome. So, let's put in the solution, it'll function as it functions. Well, many times we find that that's not the case. And it's not until we get into the deployment side of things where we are left scrambling, because all of a sudden we're in unit testing, we're in those sort of things, and we're getting high defects because that doesn't function as we thought it would do. Although the solution, that's the way the solution works. So it's really one of those things that we need to make sure that we address and we consider, and don't follow the myth that these things are real. So guiding questions. I think it's always helpful to be able to sort of say, okay, well, what is it that we actually need to ask ourselves? How do we get to a position where we are informed? And so things that are important that I think is important is understanding if we're as an organization operating, how do we measure ourselves? What do we class as performance? If I was to talk to, say, a middle management group within an organization, I might find that their view on what performance is different than what a senior executive leadership team might see as performance. And so it's about understanding how we're going to be measured, because that drives our behaviors and what is important to us. And so it's important to consider that as we're actually developing our system architecture and our business architecture, we actually find those points of saying, well, at this point here is where we would measure it this way, or here's how we would actually view it from that side. So that becomes part of our systems architecture, because at certain points we want to know that whatever we're reporting or whatever information we're deriving out of the system, we can view that as the effectiveness either of the process, of the business, of the organization, of the way we do what we do. So that's an important question for us to ask when we're looking at business and systems architecture. Has our market changed, or has the expectation within the market changed? And I talked a bit about that utility. And so, if we look in many other organizations of different type offerings, manufacturing, there's a change in that. We've got automation, we've got industry 4.0, and we've got all of those sort of things that are coming in. So the way we actually manage our manufacturing, we derive value from that manufacturing, we have supply chain, we have all those other areas. They have changed the way we go about our business. And so we are no longer just a manufacturer. We may be a shifter of materials, a global provider of, an integrator into different supply chains, or a contributor into various supply models. Especially when we talk about the offshoring that happens, where we have components built all over the world and then we actually bring them together. And so that ability to be able to deliver not only what we've manufactured, but deliver on time as it's required becomes an expectation that the market is placing on us as a manufacturer. How complex is your application technology landscape? And it's interesting walking into organizations that have probably had the same ERP for, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And then you look at how many other applications are sitting either on the outside that don't interface, or have been tried to be interfaced in there, where they're of a level of complexity that adds to. And so it's about saying, well, if we've got it being that complex, all these applications. Do we need all those applications? What are the problems that those applications were solving? Because that's what helps determine what our systems architecture should look like. So is it that we actually need to get information in from field or from supply, from that we've received goods and we've done all those sort of things to actually trigger other processes in the organization? And we've built applications or built interfaces to be able to do that. And it probably does provide us that functionality, even though it's probably costly. Then if we're rolling out a new platform, isn't it worthwhile to consider that up front, so we can actually say, well, these systems now are redundant. It removes complexity. It removes our ability to, or it removes our constraint of being able to manage and keep those updated. And so that's an important thing for us to be able to look at. And it also looks at, does it fit with our operating model? And so what applications are not supporting that? Because many times in organizations, we have people come, we have people go. Sometimes the applications they brought into the organization are still there, but they're not really valid anymore because they were a personal preference that would be brought in, as Stuart talked about with the Google instance from Microsoft. Sometimes we do it because we feel, well, that's how I like to work, instead of saying, well, we do it because it makes sense and fits within our operating model. Do you have a functional process architecture model? And I find this is one of probably the biggest gaps, in the sense that we'll have a grouping of like applications, but we never consider how each one will function. And for me, it's that, I suppose the analogy for me is if we were doing a relay race. And so we've got, 4 runners all sitting at their starting blocks, and we're going to hand a baton over. If we look at function as being, we're handing that baton over to the next part of the process, to the next area of the business, or we're actually expecting to receive that, then that functional architecture model puts the context around how all of these physical applications will sit together. And so I think it's a gap often we see within enterprise architecture, is the fact that we look at everything as an enterprise and have the physical side, but we don't actually see how each one functions to be able to deliver what the next part needs. And so that's a key piece for me. Does the service or product offer reflect how you operate? And I think that's a big one when we've evolved over time, or we've actually, in many cases, we might have done some acquisitions. And so we find we've got all of these different companies that have been successful in their own right, now operating under our umbrella. And so do we actually, with the services we have or what we've grown to be, do we actually operate in the way that we see we should? And this is part of that operating model and recontextualizing how we operate as we've evolved. And the last one in the guiding questions is, have you reviewed the current business operating model? And this is probably one of those areas that many times we speak to the technology provider, and this is the step that gets missed. And we find that often that is probably where we come back to at the end of the day and say, why is this technology not fitting? It's because it really is, our current operating model is out of date. It's if we've used that as our baseline, we have failed. And so you get, so the observations that usually come out of this is the ratio of technology related questions that you actually have in this, in the thing. There's not very many, is there? So you see here, it's mostly about the business and the processes, and then how technology would fit within that. Would a technology provider be able to answer all of these questions? So, many times we'll outsource the thing of, we've got a major deployment, a major digital transformation. Let's get in a SI. They'll be able to do it all for us. If we don't understand the questions ourselves, how do you think they're going to be able to answer those questions? Could a solution integrator make those decisions? Because many times that's what we're asking them to do. So we're asking them to come in and reinvent the business, and they'll do it based on what they know. They don't even work in your business. They're coming in as a supporter, as a provider. And so these are some of these common things that we often see, and making decisions about operating model, set the foundation of the business. and the solution architecture. And so having that very clear up front before you actually move anywhere or reset or re-foundation or do a digital transformation or complete a digital transformation, these are things that are very, very important. We'll get now into when solution architecture should occur. And so, it should be done early on, in the sense that, when we're talking about our operating model should actually be quite clear, and we should actually understand the journey that we actually do as an organization. So when we're actually working through our different processes or frameworks, it's not just about putting boxes and saying, well, this is a stream. It's saying, okay, well, now how does that journey actually happen, and understanding what we need. So that end-to-end function, we use things to support us like journey maps, checklists, flowcharts. All of those sort of things enable us to document and unpack what we think and identify where the gaps are. And that's the thing. When we assume that it's easy and it's clear, that's where we get caught out. And so by doing these sort of assessments and identifying where we all fit and how it all works, gives us that ability to be able to build a very solid business and solution and systems architecture. The thing we often miss in all of this is benefits realization. And so at the end of the day, we have a business case that says, let's do something, and we're going to get the benefit for doing this. It justifies why we're going to spend the money we're going to do. If we don't focus on that at the beginning, so as we're building this architecture, what benefit is it going to give us? Where is that going to come from? How will we measure that? What's the value? Then when we get to the end of our deployment, we have a solution that sits in there. Maybe it's been de-scoped a bit, and so we end up where we are living with something that is a challenge for us moving forward. A challenge because it's lacked in functionality. A challenge because it's more complex now than it was, because we've got a lot more workarounds we've had to do to actually link our gaps in our system architecture that we've overlooked. And so benefits realization gives us that thing of saying, well, what makes sense, and we'll get value there. And these become the non-negotiables as we work through our delivery of the approach and the deployment that we're actually looking to do. So, and it vastly improves the ability to be able to get user adoption, because if we look at this, a key focus of getting benefits is actually getting people to use this system. And so if that operating model isn't clear, people don't understand that, then the technology and people processes become unclear. And you can imagine how much of benefits get eroded by not having that clear sight, those linkages between those as they cascade down through the organization. And a particular outsourced SI, system integrator, or a vendor doesn't have really that visibility or even that need to actually measure any of that, because for them, it's a sale. I've made a sale and you're going to be my client for however many years. For them, they often you never hear them answer the phone when it comes to, this isn't delivering what I want it to be. It's usually a very short conversation because our technology is very good, is usually what you get told. The benefits realization piece needs to be factored in every time, because that's the bit that's important to you as an organization. And we asked, where should we start? And so we should start right at the beginning, in the sense that, in that vision, in that definition, that's where we start building that understanding of what our business architecture should be. It's built on things like the strategy, as Stu talked about. It's about understanding those scenarios that we are as in a business. What's our operating model? And then, okay, so overlaying that with how are the systems going to integrate? How is the infrastructure going to work for us? And so you start seeing that these are the areas, and this is how early on that we need to start considering this as we go through what we're delivering. So it's a right at the beginning to influence the rest of the digital transformation. Who should we involve? And so when we start looking at this thing in our team, often we come in and we'll sell the vision to the senior leadership team, but do we actually get them to do a bit of the work in the sense of redefining that business architecture, understanding what it is? And many times we have it where we might have the organization get someone in to do that. If they aren't specialists and they're not a facilitator or they have a vested interest, they will guide the business on what they view as being what the business architecture should look like. And so you need someone who actually is a bit removed from that in the sense that, how do I facilitate this out so you get the objectivity that you actually need? And a key point with when we talk about business architecture is making sure that you get that external specialist in, so you get that thought leadership, you get that objectivity, because that's the one that actually challenges the many of the myths that actually come out into the marketplace. And when you're using internal resources, what can happen, and the trap that people find, is that they maintain the status quo without challenging it. And many times people are caught in this view that we deliver it this way. But do you realize that that's not your business anymore? Things have changed. You've evolved. The pressures of markets have altered that, and that's a big thing to consider. And so, when we talk about systems architecture, we don't necessarily need the senior leadership team involved in that, because we've already influenced that by how the business is going to operate. But we're taking through those learnings and cascading those down into how we're building that architecture. Again, when we come back into the organizational structure, senior leadership team should be part of that, because that organizational structure could change based on the architecture that we've defined, the solution we're going to put in place. And then obviously as we define those processes, how are people going to do that? There's a change effort. There's all of those sort of things that become part of it. So when we talk about different areas of the organization in preparation, in readiness to be able to get ready to be able to build things like architecture and systems architecture and your org structures and really leverage the benefit of what digital transformation provides for us, then it's important that we actually make sure the right people are involved. And so I think I've hopefully covered the subject across. There's case studies in the sense that we can talk about different organizations and the different ways they go about it. But I think the key message out of the case studies is that, we consider and give business and solution architecture the time and effort it needs to influence the rest of the decisions that we make. And I suppose, Fraser, is there any questions out of that?
Do we have any questions from the audience? Now's your chance, everybody. You have Wayne here. You can pick his brain. So if you have any questions, pop them in the comments. But Wayne, I think, you summed it up very well. I mean, it sounds like it's mostly about how can you simplify things. And if you're building on this foundation, that's really how the growth and seamless activities between all of your systems will work, right? So I don't see any questions in the comments. So, I mean, if there's no questions, I guess we just explain it all.
I've done a good job. I've sent everybody to sleep, so hopefully not. But hopefully that gives a pretty clear view of where it sits, where business architecture and solution systems architecture actually fits.
Very much. So I appreciate it, Wayne. Thank you so much for your time and just enlightening us with such an important topic. Now, I want to direct everybody's attention to the button at the bottom of your screen if you're on Crowdcast. This is a link that takes you directly to our 2021 Digital Transformation Report. So this is a report that Third Speech puts out annually, and it covers the different trends in the transformation industry. It covers everything from the average time it takes to implement a software, how much it costs, what are the risks, broken down by the size of your company. We also list the top ERP, CRMs, HCM systems, really just a full holistic piece that you can refer to as you go through your digital transformation. So make sure to check that out. We are going to take a quick 5-minute break while we bring Daryl on the stage and get ready to talk about all things cybersecurity. Obviously, the world is changing so fast. So definitely stay tuned for this next segment. I think it's going to be very engaging and enlightening, if you will. So we will see you guys back here in about 5 minutes.
Let's see how scary this is. Can you guys hear me? Let's see.
We can hear you, and I can see you.
Good. I'm at a hotel, so I'm like trying to, the lamp looks nice, but I'm not sure.
It's professional video lighting.
Yeah, I don't think so. How is the lighting? Is it okay?
Yep, your lighting's good, and I don't think we're in the green screen. I think we're live still, and we have about 4 minutes to jump back into everything.
Is there a green screen behind me, or will there be? No, it's whatever the background, right? Let me put my sweater on here.
Yeah, it's just your background, but we're actually live right now too, Daryl.
Okay.
So,
okay. So don't do too much.
This is the beauty of live events.
Good.
Yes. So we'll give it 3 minutes. We have about 3.5 minutes left. Everybody's doing what they need to do, getting their water, going to the restroom, and we'll meet back here in 3 minutes to get started on your segment.
Okay.
All right, we are back in action. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Perfect, and I can hear you. So I am excited about this segment because I just feel that we are in some changing times right now. I feel every time I turn on the news, there's another hack that happened to a giant company or a government entity. It's just been so interesting to watch. And I know that you work very closely with all things cybersecurity and data management. So I'm excited to have you here to kind of pick your brain on it. Now, I want to first give kind of a backstory about who you are, where you're from. Daryl is the vice president of data at Third Stage Consulting. She's originally from Rhode Island, the tiniest little state in the US. And now, where are you calling in from now, Daryl?
Right now, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay, got it. So I know you go back and forth between Florida and New Hampshire. So you're living the beach life right now, I hope.
Yeah, I'm not a person for a tan. I am not a tanner. So I hide on the beach. But yes, I live in beaches.
That's awesome. I love it. And I know you've been in this industry for 30 or so years, and you started off as a system integrator for Great Plains, which I think is now Dynamics. And then you moved to SAP. So, I think through everything that you've done, you've kind of found that passion for, different things around data, whether it's integration, data privacy, data security, data readiness. So again, I'm excited to pick your brain. And I think it's important to know, everybody, that she is training for her next triathlon. And she just casually hikes the tallest peaks in New Hampshire. So we have an athlete on our hands as well as a cybersecurity expert. So anyways, welcome, Daryl. I'm excited that you're here.
Oh, well, I'm really glad to be here. Excellent.
Well, let's jump in. I have a few questions for you, and I want to start at the 50,000-foot view. As I mentioned, a lot has changed just with the pandemic, with people working remotely, just in consumer behavior. Literally everything, I feel, has pivoted a little bit. So tell me a little bit about how things are different now as it relates to cybersecurity.
Yeah, you mentioned a really good point, which I try to forget about, but we really can't, and that's the pandemic. And the pandemic really did change a lot of things in our lives. Obviously, in our work lives, it's changed our lives, I think, forever. But it's really had an impact on data and cybersecurity, and I think IT management and data management in general. And here's why. As everybody went home and stayed home and then gradually started working from home, that meant that once upon a time, when you went into the office, you were under this umbrella with an IT staff and things were plugged in and you were using a local network and everybody was kind of focused on the group of people that were in the buildings that were working there in a kind of closed environment. Well, that all changed virtually overnight to probably hundreds of millions of workers now across the globe working from home on their really distributed network of Wi-Fi and home equipment. And now the IT staff and the people that were securing the content and making sure that there were no bad actors getting into the system. Well, now instead of looking at 1 or 2 or 3 locations, how many ever locations the company has, now they're responsible for kind of securing and creating an envelope around every single worker who is flung out using their kid's spare computer, the home network that kids are gaming on. They're going to coffee shops or any place that they can get a good Wi-Fi signal in their cars, anything. So everything went from pretty much a controlled environment for IT to a very distributed and immature control environment that people were now thrust into by virtue of having to work from home. So that left, as you can imagine, a lot more vulnerabilities, because instead of a company having, a vulnerability of the work office and maybe the occasional work from home and people traveling and some people tunneling in, to 100% everybody is gone from that closed environment. So now that left just more opportunities to break in, right? You got more areas to test. And I think the second thing that happened is that companies were suffering. They're trying to struggle with layoffs and cutbacks. They're cutting back on whatever they can. So there's less focus on IT, or even maybe more pressure because you're asking them to do everything, from helping them log in with this equipment, the laptop that just got sent to them so that they could work from home on the network. So IT is doing way more than security, and their job just got probably 5-10 times more difficult. So you have less, so now you have less people able to do the work that needs to be done because they're asked to do more things than they were doing before, in addition to security. And I think the third thing that's happened is that criminal enterprises have seen this as a new way to make money. Hey, if we can't move those container ships that are sitting out there on the dock because of COVID, because the workers are all homesick, then maybe we should beef up and put more assets into cyber attacks and ransomware so we can make some money. So I think that really those three things were kind of a perfect storm for cyber issues rising during the pandemic, and that rise that we continue to see. So that's made a big game changer in that. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about specifics about that if you're interested in any part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to see how quickly things can change. I mean, obviously the pandemic was a huge world event that doesn't happen every day, right? And things are bound to adjust with that. And we've seen it firsthand. I mean, we saw what happened with SolarWinds. We saw what happened with the Colonial Pipeline. So I want to kind of break down these big breaches that we saw recently. Let's start with SolarWinds. How about what happened? Why was it such a big deal?
SolarWinds, I think, really rocked the IT and security world. And here's why. SolarWinds is software that's used to do upgrades in corporate environments. So if you've ever worked for a big company or really anything, they have updates that they make to their environments, and they use the SolarWinds to basically go out and deploy these patches and push the updates out to corporate users. Well, what happened is that software, as it was being developed, a lot of people don't really understand, how did it get in there, right? How did that bug get in there? Well, that bug got in there because they tested the software, and then before they moved it to be released in production, a hacker got in to the company, to SolarWinds, and inserted a Trojan horse in there, a piece of remote activated code or time sensitive code that would then get deployed along with all those wonderful updates that they're normally paying to get. So right in with all of the rest of the stuff that you'd expect SolarWinds to be doing for you, that you pay them to do for you, is using that software. There was a piece of bad code, a code that would go and activate later after it got pushed in with all the good stuff into all these companies' systems. And that software got activated to go and create an extra user that would allow kind of like a backdoor entry in all of these companies for the hackers to come on in and do their thing. And that got by everybody. So that was a hack of software that's meant to protect companies from this type of thing. So all of those updates that we would push out for Windows and whatnot, and all the security updates and anything else a corporation could do, along with that came the bad stuff. So that is what I would call a definite hack. But it really rocked the world because it was so at the core of a company that we trusted. It wasn't like an individual company being attacked. It was so brilliant of the hackers to come in and use that vector of a trusted piece of software that's constantly, they open the gates and say, come on in, bring that new update in here. They open it up for that, and they stuck the Trojan horse right on that sweeping trend as it comes in. And that's what was so scary about that. People just weren't expecting the threat to come from that trusted source. And I isn't that amazing? I just think
that's just mind-blowing.
Very clever, very, very clever. And it got by a lot. And we'll talk a little bit later, don't let me forget, about what could companies have done to prevent that from happening, because there are ways to do that.
Yeah, that was my next question too, was how can we prevent something like that happening if it's so sly and stealth for these hackers to just come put a little horse in. So what about the Colonial pipeline? I know that was a little bit different with ransomware. So maybe you could talk about that one.
Yes, not a hack per se. Well, ransomware comes in with a hack. It's not a breach, I should say. So let's talk a little bit about breaches versus hacking. So a breach can occur, it can be two different things, right? A breach can be when somebody just leaves data or a system exposed. In the true sense of what a breach is, like if we look at Europe, who is far ahead of us in our data security prevention and the way that they manage handling and protecting their own data and client data. A breach is any time that there's an opening, and whether or not anything bad happens, the breach refers to an opening. So think about a breach like if a sandbar is breached or something. It's just open. It doesn't mean that anything bad happened or anything escaped or anything was stolen. In the purest sense of it, it means that there was a potential exposure, whether or not something happened, or whether or not we even know that something happened. Look, in Europe, you have to even say, when somebody left a sensitive document out and they know that it was left out in public in a place that had sensitive information, that's considered a data breach under GDPR law. And also would be if somebody left a company and the passwords weren't changed for X number of days or hours after that employee left, that's also considered a breach, whether or not somebody came in and did that. So when we talk about breaches, I think Americans think about somebody came in and stole something and that's a breach. But in the truest sense of the word, the fact that you left the door open in any way, shape, or form is the breach. All right, so the Colonial pipeline was not a breach in a, well, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't a breach where people necessarily came in and took data out, right? But it was a ransomware attack. I'm not sure how they got into the system. I haven't read the recent diagnosis or after the fact kind of play-by-play on what exactly happened there. But they were able to get can usually be a small amount of code in there that goes in, and in the event of a ransomware, they actually just take your data and encrypt it. They encrypt it. So that means that any piece of data that you have available in the system is now locked down, and they hold the key. Now they hold that key so they can unencrypt the data, or they can steal the data and then unencrypt it with the key, in which case that's called a ransomware with a data exfiltration, where they're actually able to do that. So when we talk about ransomware, you've got this big ransomware problem, but you've got two problems in your ransomware, right? You've got, oh my gosh, did they locked us out of our system, our own data, we can't use it, and they stole it as well, or we think they stole it, we don't know if they stole it. I don't know if there was a problem with exfiltration on the pipeline one, but we do know that they locked down all their data such that they couldn't process the oil transmissions. They couldn't make their systems run at all because all of their data was not in the form that it needs to be in order to make their systems work. So they had to shut everything down. That means that as we saw at the pumps with the high spike in gases and some gas lines in some locations and shortages, they really just couldn't get that oil to move through, because there are so many systems, there are so many sensors involved in moving that oil from point A to point B and making sure that it's safe and they can monitor it and log in. All that was blocked for them. And in the end, it was a very high ransom. I think it was $5 million, and they had to pay that ransom. It turns out that they did pay that ransom. Now, I have heard that the FBI was able to track down where the money went. It's usually in cryptocurrency. So you're forced to go buy Bitcoin or buy some other digital currency and then pay the bad actors, as we say, the ransomware guys, and you have to pay them money in order to get the key back, so that then you can use the key to unlock your data, right? So they had to pay that money. They went and paid and went in Bitcoin, and it went off into cyberspace, into someone else's, what they thought was untraceable place. But I think the FBI was able to find the money and retrieve the money and bring it back. But most small companies will never see their money back. And here's the other problem. If they do ransomware and they're successful at it, and you don't have proper backups to get your system back up and running, not only data backups, but application backups, and then various, step-by-step backups going back in time to the point before you were infected, you really can't get your system back up and running without paying them. And believe me, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to get your system up and running, even if they give you the key. They might, or they may never even give you the key, right? What if you just pay them the money and they don't even give you the key, or they give you the wrong key, or when you go to use the key, you just can't get it back up and running, and now you've lost business, and you've lost your ability to put together the orders that you had, or maybe you've lost other critical things that you can never retrieve because you just didn't have that system for switching over while you were under attack to a new system or a standby system or a redundant system, and it's very disconcerting. So being able to be prepared for ransomware and having plans in place that are step by step. This is where our backups are. This is what we're going to do in the event of an emergency. Just like we prepare for hurricanes, businesses need to start preparing for ransomware emergencies and other cyber emergencies, because it's just a matter of time before there's a weakness discovered and a company is now under attack.
Wow, that is just mind-blowing. And the fact that, you have no other choice as far as the Colonial Pipeline goes, they had no other choice other than to pay it, and to pay $5 million to get, like you said, the key back, and that being your only option. I mean, nobody wants to be backed up into a corner like that. So I know there's a lot of companies that are talking about cyber insurance, and that's kind of their safety net. It's their comfort zone. And they say, we're okay. We don't really need to have this extensive cybersecurity strategy because we have insurance. If something happens, then it happens. But in this scenario, if you get a ransomware attack and you're backed into a corner like they were for the Colonial Pipeline, I mean, you might potentially be out of business, worst case scenario. So do you think that that is a sound strategy, is being reliant on cyber insurance, or should people reconsider?
Cyber insurance is a really rapidly maturing product market, right? So a year ago, I'd say, maybe you'll do okay. You'll pay the extra money, get that cyber insurance rider, and run your risks. But I think that the word coming back now is that the insurance companies are really becoming so much more sophisticated in defending themselves against having to pay out claims. So if you can imagine that if you were an insurance company, you'd be looking at everything right now, because there's such acceleration in the market that they're going to hang on every little clause, every little bit of wording. So what was true a year ago for feeling some level of comfort because you have insurance, I wouldn't be considering that to be a comfort place today. So let's think about this. I think this is one of the trends that's coming, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of in the cyber insurance world. think about it. If there was a storm coming, in other words, they had predict that there were going to be severe storms or there was a hurricane coming, and then you decided that you were going to go open up your roof and do construction at that time, and you didn't secure your roof and you didn't close your windows and you didn't take any measure at all to secure your house, and you knew there was a storm coming. To claim after the fact that everything inside your house was damaged, your walls, your furniture, and all of that, while you simply just said, well, I've got insurance, and didn't do a single thing when you knew that there were things you could do to prevent a problem, that is kind of what we're going to be facing now in the next year with cyber insurance. They're going to be saying, listen, Mr. CEO, CIO, or whatever, what did you do? What steps did you take to prevent bad actors from coming into your company and putting ransomware in place? What did you do to prevent a data breach and exfiltration of data? Show us your systems that you're using, your policies and your procedures, the expertise that you have on staff or contracted with in order to put a plan in place and then execute against that plan. What's your plan and what were you doing to develop that plan and then build out that plan? And that's what we call having a defensible position. So if you have a situation and you're attacked, and then you go and you say, well, this is what we did. They're going to say, well, what measures did you have in place? Not right away, but after, right? They'll say, what measures did you have in place? And if you say, well, nothing really, we have, McAfee on each of our personal computers. Well, there's going to be there will be questions raised about your policies. So what you're going to start to see now is a demand for a more organized approach for American businesses to have on protecting themselves from data security breaches, attacks, and ransomware. You may even see some requests for protection from the government or some language or work with insurance companies that if companies are more advanced in their protections and the procedures that they have, maybe they get a lower rate, or maybe there'll be some absolution for insurance companies that the government can give them for when companies don't do anything to protect themselves. And what would they cover anyway? Reading that small fine print associated with that and what's in there is really important, because things are changing and they're starting to put in this language into every policy now, new policy that they write that is ambiguous and really gives them a lot of wiggle room. So in short, I really don't think that you should be just relying on your cyber insurance to be the only thing that protects you from financial harm. The ruin that can take place within an organization, the loss of business, the disruption, the reputational damage when you lose people's information or they can't place their order or you lose their stuff. I mean, yes, it's happening to a lot of businesses, but if you're the one that's trying to place the order and your order gets lost and you needed it for something, you're going to be pretty angry and you're going to say, well, why didn't you protect yourself from this kind of thing, Mr. Business, that I just spent $2,000 on my couch for? That's your problem. That's not my problem. So in addition to just losing money if you have to pay out for the ransomware or have to, restore, and maybe even a little bit of loss of business, I don't think that's even going to come close to covering what the damage will be if you are subject to one of these attacks.
Right. That makes sense. And I mean, insurance companies are they're hard, right? Just in general with everything. So I imagine it's the same thing with this, and that fine print can throw you for a loop. Even if they do pay out, you have that other trade-off, like you said, of you could lose your whole business. So get your cybersecurity strategies, guys, if you're listening.
Yeah. Take a look at
now, I know.
Yeah.
Take a look at the policies and figure out what you're doing for yourself, because they could also, like you said, if you're not putting your own best foot forward, it doesn't help your case. If you don't have any cybersecurity strategy, built in and you're not taking the initiative to protect your company, then the insurance company could look at that and say, well, you could kind of ask for it. So interesting stuff. Now I'm curious on just how it's happening. It seems like there's so many points of vulnerability, especially today, whether it's small companies, large companies. Can you tell me, you talked about it a little bit with SolarWinds of how they got into the update, and it sounds like that was a very unique scenario that doesn't happen every day. What are the more common points of vulnerability that you're seeing just across various industries?
Yeah, I mean, obviously phishing is still the most prolific way that you see people trying to get in. I don't know about you, but every single, I mean, you know, several times a day, I'm getting even more and more clever phone messages and texts. So there's intrusions trying to happen on your phone. And let me tell you, if you've got two-factor authentication on your phone, which everybody should have on every app that they possibly can, they're enabling that two-factor authentication. But this is the two-factor authentication device right here, isn't it? So can you imagine if they hack your phone? Now they've got access possibly to your two-factor authentication device. That is really a target for them in more sophisticated attacks. So let's take a little step up here and let's go into, we started with talking about what are the trends associated with the pandemic and why is it worse. But let's talk about some of the technical trends now that are in play here. You know, who's behind this? This latest bump that we're seeing, particularly with the Colonial Pipeline, with I think U.S. healthcare was attacked last year. We're seeing the meatpacking plant, food industries. We're seeing, they probably don't advertise it too much, but grid attacks, electricity grid attacks. Those are primarily coming from nation states. So our frenemies, I don't know what we want to call them here to be kind of more politically correct, but there are probably a top list of 4 countries that are actively engaged in nation-state sponsored and funded cyber attacks. And they do this as, in my opinion, as a form of disruptive warfare. It is a bloodless war to for the most part, I guess, but it is not without harm, and it is meant to penetrate and spread havoc and you know, economic damage in our country, and that is a new form of warfare. I think we all need to face up to the fact that this is the new war. At least one facet of the new war. And in my opinion, it is not bloodless. If you've got a hospital system and they are ransomware now and they are taken down and they are unable to access patient records and somebody comes in and has an emergency event and they can't get into their computers, they may or may not have the history of the last treatment and may not know sensitivities, allergies. So to think that it is without harm for physical life, I think is wrong. I mean, even if a grid goes down and there's power out, there are collisions and crashes and things, and people that have, you know, devices that keep them alive that now are compromised. So it's definitely not completely bloodless or deathless in its attack. It can cause physical harm. So that's a really big, you know, that's a really big problem when you think about it. That you know, millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars are being spent by other countries to attack infrastructure, food supplies, electricity supplies, medical care in our country. I mean, that's just the real reality of it. So let's take a step down from that, apart from nation state hacking. And ransomware. Let's look at organized crime. This is a very lucrative market for organized crime, as was with prostitution and drug running and human trafficking. Organized crime plays a very large and increasingly growing part in the cyber threats that we see today. And I think we all can kind of think about, well, if it's not it's not like we take a drug dealer and say, okay, you're going to stop doing that. We're sending you to college. You're going to go learn how systems, and we'll put you in a new role. It's not really how that works, but one way or another, either this, those groups or new groups that form that are organized criminals that are not necessarily connected directly to a country. They may live there or live in different places. Very hard to tell where these attacks are coming from because they can use masking devices to hop and have a series of really big hops across where they are to trace and cover all trails of where they might have come from. But one interesting trend that has alarmed me is the development of mercenary groups. So mercenary hackers. We all know what mercenary soldiers are, right? There are soldiers who are ex-military who say that for a certain amount of money, we'll go in and fight for you on behalf of whatever you want, right? Whatever war you have. There now are developing pools of mercenary cyber soldiers who will work for your mission. And so it's not necessary per se for organized crime or even nation states to do all this work and develop all this talent in-house. They can simply procure these band of criminals to work for a particular target against a company or a particular set of infrastructure. And when you think about the top talent, trained to do this with, highly paid funding against, a company that's just trying to balance their budgets and make money, and IT and cybersecurity are just one line item. And here you've got this whole other group with infrastructure that's there aiming for you if they pick you or they just happen to catch you in their net. They're pretty sophisticated and using some pretty good products as well. So let's talk a little bit about what those have a loss for words. You don't see that much with Parisa there. Loss for words. Let's talk a little bit about the tools, right? Once upon a time, it was a guy in somebody's basement and mom's basement, and he dropped out of school or whatever, and that's kind of the image that we had probably 5 years ago. And let's go to it today. That we are now in this amazing array of different teams, armies really building and organizing around the globe, trying to make a money or do damage as part of some sort of a government campaign. And they're using some really sophisticated tools. So let's start with artificial intelligence. Now artificial intelligence has been deployed as part of hacking. So the ability to detect these coming in is getting more and more difficult because the AI learns the behavior of the corporation. It can learn. It is being used to analyze large amounts of data to determine weakness, to pull together the list of all of the employees off of LinkedIn with their email addresses, finding their names and addresses and personal information about them in order to concoct a more personalized approach to getting at what they're really trying to get at, which could be access to the system for getting money, or it could be invading their email system to send emails asking for money to be sent. I know that several companies, Third Stage included, has been a victim of that. And we'll talk a little bit about that and what we can do about that in just a minute. But I also want to point out one more disturbing trend with regard to equipment and infrastructure, and that's the use of quantum computers. So computers, especially if it's a well-funded organized crime or a nation state, they're actually deploying quantum computers, which are these massive things that like the Pentagon has, and they use to process their data. When you think about Watson and IBM, that's really on the verge of quantum computing. So now, as technologies become less expensive, as organized crime and nation states have developed and put funds together for increasing this infrastructure, they're now able to either develop a supercomputer or to link multiple computers together to make a quantum computer. And what's the problem there? Well, faster hacking, faster assimilation of information, faster moving threats, faster than human beings can respond. But worse, the ability to crack our basic encryption programs like AES 128 and eventually AES 256. So the foundation of how we protect data is now at risk due to this new level of sophistication and funding from the ability to use supercomputers and quantum computing as a way to get access to companies' data and our personal data as well.
Wow. I don't know if this is freaking anybody else out.
It's not a pretty picture, and I'm so sorry to say that, but maybe we can spend the rest of the time talking about some of the positive things. So what do we do, right? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
All right. So first, let me say that I think the U.S. is finally waking up. We just don't have the same level of threat happening as to the same degree in the EU. I work a lot in the UK. I work a lot with companies that are protecting their data under GDPR. And what has evolved there is really kind of the government came in and said, you will make sure that you secure and keep private certain data, sensitive data associated with your customers and your employees and anybody that you deal with. So I am sure that that's a really good effort to put in place here in the U.S. And I think we're starting to hear rumblings now about the government going to do things. But let me tell you what they're going to do. They're going to make lip service about going out and trying to find the criminals, right? Good luck with that, okay? Because they're buried deep in the hinterlands and it's very difficult to prove. You can't exactly blame a nation for something. It's kind of difficult. It's kind of like terrorist bombings, right? You know that they might be funded by the government, but it's really kind of hard to say where this came from. So they're going to make lip service about that. But what they're really going to do is they're going to pass laws that say that companies have to do A, B, and C in order to protect their data and secure the privacy of the customer's data. And you're going to see penalties eventually levied and fines for not doing that. Because it's really up to the individual companies to start developing their own internal data privacy and data security programs to keep their own company and their data safe. It is not the government's job. We can't lock the border down. We're all in global business together. We just can't do that. So the only way I think that honestly Europe thought through this is that the only way to protect this is to make it the responsibility of the data controller. And the controller is usually the company that has the customer data and has the employee data. And actually to make anything they do with that data the responsibility of the company that controls it with penalties. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that legislation percolating up and coming into play as a response to what you see today. So what's that mean for companies? That's a lot. So let's talk now about very specific companies. What do we think this means? What do you do today? Because we're all talking today. You're like, yeah, Daryl, there's legislation coming. I'll wait until I see that. Maybe not such a good idea. We talked about the cyber insurance being a problem. So let's talk about, who we are at Third Stage here. We're helping companies to understand their digital transformation strategy plans at such a level that they're kind of thinking through, what do we need to do as part of this? What are the vendors we need to do? What are the pieces that we need to have here and should be exploring? That's what we do really well at Third Stage. So I'm very encouraged that at least the people listening here are part of a digital transformation and are going to hear this message and take it to heart. Listen, the same work that you're going to do for your digital transformation and your ERP implementations and your integrations of all your data, that's the same basic foundational work that you do for a good data privacy and cybersecurity strategy. It's yes, it's about the tools that we add and protect and how we protect with tools. But you don't know what to protect if you don't know what you have. And if you're going through this process of a digital transformation, and especially if you're talking with us, please reach out and say, hey, how can we weave in the foundational work associated with a good data privacy and cybersecurity strategy, a data security strategy, to what we're doing, so we don't have to go through and reduplicate all this work again once this legislation starts to come in, or once the insurance company sends the letter and says, hey, you got to do A, B, and C. Now, if you're already past that point, and you've already moved past your digital transformation and you've completed it, you have to rip open the engine again, look at everything again, and probably have to make some changes. Changes that would be much easier to plan for now and do now as part of your digital transformation. You're going to save a whole lot of money and keep your company a lot more secure and be better positioned for the future if you just take the time during your digital transformation strategy and your ERP implementation, or any integration IT projects that you're doing. You should be thinking data privacy and cybersecurity. What does that mean to us? Every single thing. In fact, I want everybody here today to go out to their change control process. I hope they have one. We're talking about not organizational change management, but software change control, system change control, whenever you change something in your system. And to just go out and look at all your forms today and add a column that says data considerations, right? Is this data private? Is it sensitive? And is there any impact on anything that would be considered sensitive data? So that's one thing that they can do today, is to start looking at that and then start weaving that into the plans. I think the next thing that people need to be doing is looking at who's making the decisions within our company for what security we have. So now let's get back down to, like we talked at the beginning, like stratifying small, medium, and large companies. It's kind of different for different tiers. So if you're a small business, what should you be thinking and doing right now? You should be thinking, I need to educate myself. I need to educate myself about what data security is. Take a course, reach out, start signing up for some learning and that's out there. Go visit websites, talk to people. You should also consider engaging an MSP that provides some security services as well. So certainly McAfee, that's a good place to start. But you may want to, depending on the size of your small business, if you've got multiple locations, you might want to engage with a firm. So start first with a firm that's helping you maybe with your laptop support. But there's another level of firm called an MSSP. So an MSP is the guy that helps you with the laptop that you call up, right? And then you have an MSSP, which is a managed security services provider. So managed services would be laptop support, software updates, SolarWinds updates. A managed security services provider would be a layer or a different level of that, which would look specifically at how you're being protected. So if you're a large or small business, you should be looking at maybe on the cusp of that. For me, and certainly phishing education and all of that, and workshops. If you're not sure, just drop us a line and we're happy to send you some information about that. And we probably should talk about putting together some little weekly things that we can put out the door for you as well. The next thing, if you're a medium-sized business, that's where you have more to lose. You've got more endpoints, you've got more things to secure. In that case, thinking about poor Joe, the IT guy who's been going crazy through the pandemic anyway, he's probably not the guy that's going to move forward with you and do everything you need to protect yourself in this scary changing world that we have now. So in that case, I'd recommend that you look at an MSSP to help, and that you also are engaging perhaps a fractional or virtual CISO.
Oh, I think we lost her. We'll give it a second to come back. It really is mind-boggling how much things are changing and how quickly it's evolving. And one thing I'm going to ask Daryl here when she comes back, but is the trajectory of how much cyber threats are growing and expanding, is it matched by our cybersecurity efforts, or are we just kind of a little bit lackadaisical in adopting these different strategies that Daryl's talking about right now? So let's go ahead and here, take a brief second. I'll give her some time to come back and see if she can get her internet working. I know hotel internet can be so reliable, right? And she is on the road, so that is probably what's happening behind there. Now, you guys, I will also note, this is a great time to drop your questions in as well. I mean, we have a very open dialogue happening here with Daryl. So if you guys have questions on how specifically you can incorporate some level of cybersecurity into your business, now's the time to kind of pick her brain. So feel free to add your comments or your questions in the chat. One thing I know Eric and I have been chatting about on our podcast is putting out workshops like Daryl was talking about, and also sending, almost like practice phishing emails to your team so that they get good at recognizing what a phishing email might look like. So that's one thing you can do as well. Welcome back, Daryl.
Is that for me?
I think that's better. I think I'm muted and
Okay.
it works. Now I'm having trouble with my mute button too. So if I just kind of go silent for a little while, that's why. But do you remember what you were saying before we lost you?
I do. I do. Sorry. Okay, you mute. Yeah. Okay.
Audio troubles. Gotta love it.
How about now?
Much better. There you go. Oh, you're back on mute. You're back on mute. We can't hear you again.
Okay. All right. So, okay now?
Okay, now.
So yes, I was talking about mid-sized companies. So what can they do? They need to be using that managed security services provider in addition to Joe and IT. Okay, that's a program that's usually a run or a platform that you're running and engaged with a partner that's helping to oversee and keep up. That helps you keep up with the latest and greatest. And if you're just getting into it, I'd go with that virtual CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, or fractional CISO. That's going to allow you to be able to put a plan that's right size for you. So you're not doing something too big, too small, that you know what you're getting and that they understand what your plans are for your business. They'll be participating maybe in giving you advice on your digital strategy, transformation and inputs. We often provide that service kind of as we're going along with companies for third stage that are in that process, just starting to touch the surface of what should you be doing associated with this. For large companies, well, hopefully you have your own internal team. In that case, I wouldn't say you're on your own, but you certainly need to be constantly reinvesting and exploring what it is that you're doing. And especially now is the time to prepare and make sure that you have a good policy for data privacy and for cybersecurity. Remember when we talked at the beginning, you're really vulnerable for insurance companies not paying out. And the disparity, you know why I can see this coming is because, oh my gosh, the difference between a European company and an American company is startling in their awareness of their risk and their need to get with the program and even what to do. So hopefully this was helpful. Give some people some actionable advice. Don't go it alone. Take it seriously. Start planning now. And if you're going to touch anything related to IT, it should be now every single thing starting tomorrow should be, do we need to be concerned about data security with this change? Is there anything we can do about data security while we're in here doing this change? And if you're doing a digital transformation, let's weave all that in now for the planning stages, so you're not wasting money and having to do this effort, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, when all of a sudden it becomes apparent that you have to do something.
Wow. That's so interesting. And one thing I wanted to ask you, just because I'm curious on your perspective on it, but as I always talk about how quickly technology is evolving. I mean, you go 1 week and it's like a new technology's out, things are different. It's advancing so quickly. And given the changes in the just how the world is operating today, with all these changes and how quickly things are evolving, do you think that companies are keeping up with their cybersecurity efforts to match the changes and match the increase in cyber threats? Or is it almost lackadaisical, trickling behind the rate of these threats?
It's abysmal. It's like when the virus came that nobody could believe the coronavirus was here and they weren't changing any behavior at all. And there's some political aspects to that, so I'm not going to go into it for that, but you can imagine that we've got a real threat and we have to change the way we're doing things, period, right? We have to change something. And if we don't, then eventually the risk, grows, and it becomes a statistical fact that you'll succumb in some way to either ransomware or some other form of a hacking event. And let's not rule out that cybersecurity and data breaches a lot of times come from the inside. They come from employees that are stealing customer lists, that employees that are looking up information about celebrity customers or their neighbors or whatever. That's also a data breach. And that's also going to be the kind of thing that's going to be covered under, I'm sure, the forthcoming legislation. Like, you can't just let people have access to any data in the system. You have to have a reason under GDPR law for people to have access to sensitive data. There must be a legitimate business reason. We just don't even have that concept here in the United States. We really don't. And we missed the boat because we didn't take that opportunity with all of the momentum when GDPR was going in to upgrade our systems the way the Europeans did. So what seemed like a market disadvantage at that point is now going to become a market disadvantage for the United States as we try to catch up. So we're going to have to do it. And unfortunately, it means in a lot of cases for medium-sized with companies with legacy systems, a lot of systems that really have disparate systems and copies of data everywhere, they're going to have to clean all that up. It's going to be very expensive. So the time now, again, if you're thinking about digital transformation, ERP, now's the time. We're not just going to connect what you have. You're going to take this time and look, what do we have? And make this logical. If you're going to invest money, invest it and move the stuff once instead of moving and documenting it 2 times in probably in 12 months as you start to realize that this is the next phase that's coming.
Great. Wow. Very valuable. Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's always a pleasure. My mind is always blown every time I have a conversation with you. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no problem. We know how it is. All right, everybody. We have this chat box. I just put in all of our contact information. So you have my email address, you have the rest of our marketing team's email address, as well as the Third Stage website, a few different resources for you, such as our YouTube channel, the podcast, and our LinkedIn page. So I'd say the best place for you to go if you want to stay up to date is follow us on LinkedIn, because that's where we're pushing out all of our new articles, all of our new podcast episodes, new videos, etc. So we hope to see you on there. I also want to, again, draw your attention to the link at the bottom of the screen if you are on Crowdcast. You can also find this on the Third Stage website. It's the 2021 Digital Transformation Report with a lot of valuable insights ranging from, you know, what ERPs would be best fitting for the size of your company, all the way to, you know, everything that you need to know about digital transformation in general. So definitely check that out. Like I said at the beginning of this session, we host these Full Throttle workshops every month. So stay tuned to hear on our Full Throttle workshop next month. We will also send out an email after this event with the information that I listed in this chat box. I know somebody asked to share on email, so I will be sure to include this, as well as a note for you guys if you would like a copy of the presentations as well. So keep an eye out for that, and we hope to see you guys at next month's Full Throttle workshop. Otherwise, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you, so thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Take care.